Okay. Yeah, there we go. So what I was just saying is that, I think, to do what I got to do requires a little bit of a pirate attitude. So that's kind of my personality.
Yeah, that's true.
I think, sometimes, sometimes you have to be willing to hoist the black flag, fire a few cannons, and, if need be, slit a few throats. So there goes it.
Cool. For people listening, if you go watch some of these culinary medicine videos, Chef Dr.Mike has a lot of pirate collectibles. I don't know what you're calling
but we shall call them accoutrements. There, that's a very very nice. Yeah, very nice term.
That's pretty. They look cool though. I was like,
yeah, thanks. Hey. What do they say? Always be yourself. Unless you can be a pirate, then be a pirate.
Unless it is yourself. Well,
always be yourself. Unless you can be a pirate, then be a pirate.
Then be a pirate.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah. I always wonder about that. Because, in Florida, you always hear about the treasure hunter people.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, I used to live in Florida. I lived in Tampa for a little while. So.
Cool.
Yeah. And actually, where is it? West Palm, I guess down further, a little south. That's where all those Spanish fleets wrecked and people are still hunting the treasures and stuff like that.
And it makes me want to get one of those metal detectors.
Yeah. I'll be watching you on the History Channel for long.
All right, guys. So welcome to Chef Grace's Place. Today we have Chef Dr. Mike. Doctor's not his first name. But he is a chef he's a doctor that's also a chef. He's a cardiologist.
Yep.
And he has started an accredited program called Culinary Medicine. And I'm going to mess up the University of
Montana.
I keep wanting to say Minnesota for some reason. I don't know why. But the University of Montana. So how did you? Did you always want to be a cardiologist?
I actually cooked professionally first. So as I was growing up, always had a love of food. My mom was a home cook, but she was like a really good home cook for the most part. And, that was back in the day of, Julia Child and Graham Kerr. I'm showing my age. And, I would cook with her. She had the cookbooks. We moved around a lot. So cooking in the kitchen was always a place of sort of a sanctuary for me as a kid. And when I went off to college, I had to work to help, get money to go through college. Like a lot of people, I went to the food industry. And actually thought, I'd walk in and, they'd give me a chef's jacket because thought I was a pretty good home cook. And I walked in and I got a dishwasher's rag and a promise that if something opened up in the line, they'd teach me to cook. And so I actually started as a dishwasher, washed dishes for about 6 months before I got a shot on the line, which was kind of like a hotel restaurant in a college town. And then eventually went up to another restaurant. And there was a great guy who was not formally trained, but had cooked for 30 years, knew the ropes, really took me under his wing. And by the time I finished, I was running the back of the house on a Friday night or Saturday night. What we, I guess, call kind of a sous chef today. We didn't really have titles back then. And when I finished college, I went off to medical school, but I always kept that interest in food. And you're in Florida, so you could understand the story that I'm getting to. If you go just a little north into sort of southern Georgia, I was there for a while. And like I said, kept the interest in food and things, and had sort of my own personal health issues that really led me to re-examine the relationship between food, health, and diet. And I was working at a hospital in rural Georgia. So this is southwestern rural Georgia now. And as we often do, we give talks to the public, and we're out, talking to them about stuff, and I'm talking about cholesterol and diabetes and heart risk. And then, about a handful of people show up from the community. And at the end of this deal, there's this one guy who's still awake through my lecture, and I was like, "Do you have any questions?" And he actually had a question, and I was so excited. I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is great! Like somebody's interested in what I'm saying. You've got a great question." I was, "Yes, sir. What can I answer for you?" He goes, "Now I'm going to do my best southern impression here." It's like, "So, Doc, can I eat fried catfish? Because it's a fish, but it's fried." and and I turned to the person who had sponsored this event, and I was like, I should just talk to people about food, because like whether I'm in the office or I talk to them in the hospital or I'm out here, what people really want to know about is they really want to know what they can eat. And she's like, "Well, my husband runs a catering company. Can you cook?" And I was like, "Yeah, I cook professionally." And that sort of started me back off on really pulling, my food experience, personal food experience, and my medical training as a cardiologist, really kind of pulling those together. I did go back and got my culinary degree at Ashworth University outside of Atlanta, and then was working up in Montana. And one of the deans had read a book that I'd written, and we got to talking. And as most things in a state-run university, it's taken a lot of time, but we've actually moved forward and established our culinary medicine program. And it's one of the first and one of the few university accredited programs. It's graduate level, 3 credit introduction to culinary medicine program. So we're pretty proud of that accomplishment.
So I watched, I guess maybe like an intro kind of to it, but like other people have not. Do people listening to this have no idea what I'm talking about? So, what would be, when we talk about culinary medicine? Well, number one, how long ago was it when you had that guy in Georgia asking you about the catfish?
Gosh, that set us out. That's probably been about 10 years, about 10 years ago. Yeah.
That's when the idea started, basically.
That's when I started really crafting and communicating the idea for the public. Some years before that, like I knew good things to eat. I know what real good food tastes like. I know what I enjoyed, but my lifestyle was pretty crappy. Like a lot of doctors, it's kind of do what I say, not what I do. We talk about get rest, get exercise, eat right, right? I'm on call, like right now, I'm on call 24/7 for, over a week. So I have no reliable sleep patterns. While we're doing that, you can't really get into a rhythm where you can exercise, or you're constantly on the phone or on the pager. And to go with that, diet was crap. I was eating what drug reps were bringing into the hospital, which was, sort of the fast food, junk food, and just grabbing as I could catch it. And, living on pots of coffee in the morning and, Diet Cokes and things in the afternoon. I pretty much did everything bad except actually smoke cigarettes. If I had done that, I would have hit like the trifecta, and I paid a price. And I was told that I had injured some joints because I was not as good in athletics as I thought I was in high school, and all that inflammation and things caught up with me. And I was actually told at a young age I needed joint replacements. And I was like,
"What were you playing?"
Well, let's see. I did martial arts, which I still do, but football, track, basketball, wrestling, all those high school kind of things, and apparently was not really very good at any of them, and managed to just to injure myself, and that kind of came back. And I know that those type of joint diseases are accelerated when your body's in an inflammatory state. So I kind of looked at, well, what can I do to maybe put this off for a couple of years? And, that was over 20 years ago. And, I can't play basketball because of the high impact, but, I can hike the mountains of Montana for 8 hours and, keep on walking. So, that was my bit of my personal journey into looking at the relationship between the food I ate, my lifestyle, and my own personal health.
I mean, personally, my when I was a kid, my diet was terrible. It was like, and also, you know, my mom's a medical professional, but they didn't know, they didn't really know anything about nutrition. And like, I basically lived off candy cakes like my entire childhood. And I was competing like my brother and I were the top grapplers in the country. We were in high school. So like doing that off of candy cakes, like no, like I had the worst tendonitis in my knees. Like I would just have to like go to sleep with ice packs on. It was so bad. So like, and just like all the Advil, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and you know, back then, and even now, I mean, we're still discovering these kind of relationships between what we eat, how we eat, and you know how these things manifest. You know, things like tendonitis and joint issues, diabetes, obesity. You know, obesity isn't just being overweight. There are plenty of people that are overweight that we consider overweight, which is a whole separate topic, but are very healthy from a metabolic standpoint, and people that are normal weight that are very metabolically unhealthy. And all this, you know, ties back into kind of what we eat and how we eat and things like that. And we're still, you know, we're really still learning a lot about it.
This is my hey, you have to do this interview now.
Oh, okay. Hey, time for our interview. Awesome.
Sorry. So since you started doing this, since you started culinary medicine, how has your diet changed personally? Or is it totally?
Well, you know, it's kind of gotten, I think, a little better and a little clearer. And it's not so much as me starting culinary medicine as really sort of the science catching up to, I think, a lot of what we know. And what's interesting to me is in looking back at some of my culinary mentors and people in the industry even this day, right? Chefs know what real food is, right? You know, we know that there's a difference between going out and getting a grass-fed bison steak and a burger through the drive-thru. They're not the same thing. And you're kind of laughing, but believe it or not, in medical literature, they're counted as exactly the same, right? They just go into a category called red meat, for example. And what we've really learned and where the data has really pointed me over, you know, the last decade, and I'd say really some things have come into focus in just the last 5 years or so with understanding how the gut microbiome and that the role of that bacteria interact with our body and communicate to us is the long and short of it. Culinary medicine is not complicated. It's pretty much what every chef really knows is that really good, wholesome, authentic food that has flavor, that tastes great, that you can sort of taste how it was raised and where it came from. That stuff that Mother Nature provides is really good for us. When we try to adulterate it by, you know, instead of, you know, making a chicken nugget out of a piece of chicken, you know, some breading and cooking it up, by making it out of 45 different ingredients, so that we can mold it out and it's consistent into shapes. And the chicken nugget you get in New York City is the same one you get in LA. When we do that, it affects the quality of the food that in turn affects us. And really, that's the culinary medicine course. It's that simple.
Huh, I think, I mean, I was going to take it, but I guess I already know it.
Yeah. I mean, if you got, I really, and it's funny because we do have a lot of, culinary folks who've taken the course, and you know, more so than the medical people, including some physicians who've taken the course, chefs are like, well, of course, this is like common sense. I get this. I mean, I'm out dealing and trying to source food. And especially a lot of chefs who really go that extra mile and are trying to get, you know, do kind of a seed to table. And if you're somewhere like Florida, or farm to table, and really working on bringing their customers, you know, the best quality ingredients that they can. They know that there's a difference. I think what's reassuring for them is we actually provide some of the data and say, hey, you know, you're right. Here's the science to back up what you kind of intuitively get. And I think for some of the medical people, it's really eye-opening to say, wow, this sort of makes sense. But you know, why didn't I know about, for example, we talk about something called the NOVA classification of food, which you probably never heard of. It's NOVA.
Mhm.
And there was actually an article in Discover Magazine this week about it. Now, I've been talking about it for years. We introduced it in our course that's been going on for, well, a couple of years, but we've just made it available to the public as an online course just for the last year. So, it's been on there for the last year. And this classifies food by looking not as it's red meat or is it vegetable, is it dairy, is it this, is it that, but is it raw food, minimally processed food, or is it what they call level 4, which is ultra processed food? And they show a clear correlation between, the risk of obesity, diabetes, dying of heart attack, neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, certain cancers, and how much of this ultra processed food that you consume. And folks can go to discovermagazine.com and they can look at it. I think it came out on the 9th, and they go through the discovery of this. And there's a great story behind it because it was developed actually at the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil. And as I understand the story, and the guy who came up with this and the researchers, they first published their results about 10 years ago. I think it was like maybe a little longer, maybe about around 2009. But some years before then, Brazil was an emerging economy, which means they were starting to have money, which meant all American, big soda, big snack, etc., went down there and started selling sodas and this and that. And so, as I understand, the representatives for Brazil actually approached the U.S. government at the United Nations, and where they were like, "Can you get these companies out of our country? Because the health of our population is turning to crap. Everybody's getting fat. Everybody's getting diabetes. We're seeing all these things that we never had problems with before." And the U.S. was like, free market, you're on your own. And so these researchers then started looking very scientifically at that relationship between, ultra processed food and what we call modern disabilities and diseases and the things I've described. And they've really documented, and it's since been shown in other countries, other studies around the world, and it's actually been adopted, this NOVA classification by the United Nations. But in this country, I'm continually amazed by how many medical people, including nutritionists and dietitians that I talk to, that have no knowledge. They're like, "Nova, what are you talking about?" I was like,
I always found
it's
it
right there.
interesting that, I don't know, to me, like when I think of, or when I would like even like go to a nutritionist, because when I was competing in jujitsu one time, and I'll never do it again. I was trying to cut weight to get into the lower weight class because I was probably like 15 or 16, and it wasn't separated in the genders yet.
Mhm.
I was getting all these guys in like the 125-pound weight class that were like, they were starting to get facial hair. They had testosterone, and I was like, come on, you know what I mean? So I was trying to get down to a lower weight class, and which actually I couldn't even do it because my diet was so terrible. Like it was like all sugar. Because my mom didn't cook. And I had a stepfather that would like eat everything in the fridge. So like I literally like hid tasty cakes like under my bed. So I was like, oh, just in case I get hungry. So, but I did, I had there was like really good Italian food in my town. So I'd be eating like chicken parm subs and tasty cakes and pizza.
Chicken
And
parm, you taste so good.
exactly. I was like, that's protein, right? So I tried to cut weight by doing like a low carb diet. And by the second day, I was like crawling out of bed to go get a cookie. Like it was done. And I was like, nope, can't do it. I'll just fight the grown man. That's fine. But so then I went to college, and I always knew wanted to be a chef because I would go, not really at home, but I would go out and be like, this is good. Like, I want to eat this. So when I went to college, maybe like the second the second year I was in college, because I went to pastry school too, so like I'd still eat a fair amount of sugar. um, but I had signed up for a CSA because the apartment I lived in, there was a farmer's market like right outside the door basically every Saturday. So I went from just eating like, not only that, there was a CSA and then the Amish people were there. So I would buy like legs of goat and like, what can I do with this? Or like, and duck eggs. So I went from like, yeah, duck eggs are so good. Oh
Good.
my God. And they make the best pastries because the yolks are fattier and sweeter. But so I was just like, I went from this super processed diet to pretty much everything organic and like homemade and amazing. And I remember waking up, and I used to walk to my school and I'd be waking up and being like, I'm like happy for no reason. What the fuck is wrong with me? Because it was just like, when you talk about the gut biome, it doesn't just affect, um, like your health is also your mental health and your stress levels. And when your inflammation is down, like I remember like I always had like bags under my eyes and I was like, I had the color in my face and I was like really like, I was like, let's go. Come on. We're living today. Like
Well,
it was
yeah.
crazy.
No, but there's, and this is one of the things that we've learned over the couple of years is the science behind what you're talking about. So, for example, when you changed your diet and you started eating the real food, the organic foods, the natural foods, you actually change the composition of the bacteria in your gut. And when you do that, and then you feed them, literally, like little sea monkeys or that you have to feed, and you feed them what they like, they communicate with our body all the time. So if I were to draw like a random blood sample from you right now, about 40% of the communication molecules in the blood would be derived from your gut. And that includes the gut bacteria. And they secrete something called serotonin. Gets in your bloodstream, crosses into your brain. One of the drugs we use in the medical community to treat depression, for example, is a drug that increases serotonin levels in the brain. So serotonin is the happy drug. It's a happy molecule. And so literally those bacteria are secreting molecules that go to your brain and make you happy and feel good. And one of the weird things about that is I try not to think about it too long sometimes because it's kind of spooky, right? It's like who's really controlling who? Because they've also shown that when we eat the right things, these bacteria in our large intestine will secrete molecules, something called short chain fatty acids, particular short chain fatty acids that communicate to our brain and actually start to tell us we're full. So part of maintaining a healthy weight and feeling good is these bacteria literally making us happy, telling us, hey, you've had enough to eat, we're all good down here. And so you got to sort of wonder, like if you spend too much time thinking about it, like I said, it's kind of like body snatchers. It's like who's really in charge here? And it's such a powerful constant communication that medicine has changed from decades ago where we said, oh yeah, there's some bacteria that live in our gut because we eat some stuff that we can't digest, and they can eat it, so they're there, to saying this thing is actually like an organ. I mean, the gut bacteria are essentially an organ, and they're in constant communication with the brain and the rest of our body, particularly our immune cells, because most of our immune system, about 70%, is located in our gastrointestinal tract. So incredibly powerful. And so what you tell me makes perfect sense scientifically.
And I also, the other thing was when I was a kid, probably from when I was like, I don't know, like 12 to like until, I started changed my diet, I had terrible IBS to the point where like they didn't know if I was lactose intolerant. Nobody thought, hey, let's change the diet. I mean, they did when it came to like being lactose intolerant. They're like, oh, just don't eat cheese. You know what I mean? Like, and nobody was like, hey, you know what I mean? So don't eat sugar, like don't eat processed food. But it totally went away. Like
Yeah,
it's
and,
crazy.
and that makes total sense. I was talking to a friend of mine, and he is one of the premier surgeons at Johns Hopkins. It deals with like Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, inflammatory bowel diseases, and obviously is involved in irritable bowel syndromes, etc. as well. And we were at a conference together talking, and and I'll never forget this. He goes, Mike, he goes, before about 1950, ish, which is really when there were starting to be big changes to our food and food pathways at the end of World War II. He's like, if you look in medical literature, you know, there is no irritable bowel disease. There is no irritable bowel syndrome kind of thing going on. He said, and it's becoming more and more common. And so, what sort of what makes me irritable about that is that you hear people talk about, well, we've got to get rid of gluten. It's a gluten in the bread. Well, for 1% of the population that has true celiac disease, real gluten enteropathy, absolutely they need to avoid it. They have an immunologic reaction. But the other 7 to maybe 9% of people who are what we call gluten intolerant, or so on and so forth, it's probably a lot of crap in the processed food. And people don't realize that breads contain so much sugar, so much unwanted salt,
Oh
so
my.
many unwanted fats.
And also, uh, don't even get me started on that one. But there is I mean, I call it cake bread. The bread, like white bread, the bread you get in a
Yeah.
plastic bag at a
Yeah.
grocery store. Like they literally they take all the nutrients out of it and then they try to put it back in. Like,
Look.
you know what I mean? Like, and then they add a bunch of sugar. They don't.
Yep.
It's so, and not just that, but it's also specifically American made bread
Yes.
is the wheat is so genetically modified also to withstand these glyphosates, which are not good for you, and all this other stuff that like they're trying to withstand all these pests. It's going to make it harder for you to digest, which might give you a problem. But if you're eating like a sourdough that's made from a flour that's not, you know, that crazy wheat, then it's probably not going to give you a stomach ache at all.
Listen, my general rule of thumb is don't eat anything that sits on the shelf and can outlast Keith Richards. So, the day that Keith Richards finally dies, that loaf of Wonder Bread that you bought 18 years ago is still going to be soft in its plastic bag, sitting on the shelf. So, definitely avoid, that sort of stuff. And I so agree with you. I was actually doing a podcast earlier. I was a guest on, and we were talking. I love pizza, right? And I think that the metaphor or simile, whichever one of those is the right word, for how what's happened to our diet is the pizza, right? So you look at a crappy industrial, chain pizza. You were talking about the flours, junk. There's all these things added to it. It's loaded with sugar. The sauce has sugar and preservatives. The cheese is fake, and it's got these meat-like, little nuggets that look like the droppings from a rabbit cage on top as a topping. And yes, that is probably one of the top 10 worst things you could possibly ingest. But let's you and I, for a minute now, let's just go to the Amalfi Coast, put our feet up, looking out over the ocean, and have a
You
real.
don't even have to go that far. You could just go to New Jersey.
Hey, forget about it, Grace. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Forget about it.
That's where I grew up. When I grew up, like they had the pizza war. Like you would go
Wait,
in.
where in Jersey did you grow up?
I grew up in Nutley, New Jersey. Also,
Oh,
the
okay.
town
I grew up in Whippany near Morristown.
Okay, so you know.
So forget about it. I know what you're
Yeah.
talking about.
So yeah, they would have you pay $5 and you get to taste all the pizza in town, and then you vote on the best pizza. But there was a Domino's in my town, and the only reason it was there was because all these pizzerias closed at like a decent hour. So if it was like 3 o'clock in the morning and you were out partying in the
Yeah.
city and you needed something to eat, that was
Yeah.
the only place you could go besides the diner. But that's the only way I made money. But like all these, these small pizzas, like number one, you're supporting a small business, which is great.
Yeah.
But the pizza was so good.
Well, yeah. I mean, let's look. It's dough that has 4 ingredients. It's flour, yeast, salt, water, and real flour,
Yeah.
tomatoes, basil, and maybe a little bit of buffalo mozzarella, maybe a little cow mozzarella, whatever. But that good real cheese, not this sort of really highly processed stuff. And I was actually talking to a pizza buddy of mine, and he sells high quality pizza cheese. He's like, Mike, you don't even know. And I learned this just the other week. He said, there are additives that are allowed in these pizza cheeses that they don't have to put on a food label, like titanium oxide.
I have
And
to ask you about that because that I remember my boyfriend worked at Starbucks for a long time, and the roasted almonds had I looked at the label and it was like titanium dioxide.
yeah.
How that's like actual titanium dioxide.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, I believe it's also in things like as it's used as a toothpaste whitener and things like that. So, I'm not an expert in heavy metals, and I don't want to claim that I am, but I just as a personal note, I don't really want to be eating, as you said, glyphosate, and I really don't want to be eating and chewing on titanium.
Yeah.
I just prefer like I said, a simple real pizza with real cheese, the way nature intended us to eat it. You got to remember too, as I talk about, these bacteria are so important for our health, right? They've co-evolved with us over millions of years to adjust and co-metabolize the foods that we eat. And now we're giving them these weird things and chemicals that they've never seen before. And it turns out that a lot of those chemicals sort of it's like making your garden radioactive. You're changing that internal garden that you have from one that's organic and giving you those great summer tomatoes to like something that you might see outside of Chernobyl. You don't want to go to the farmers market at Chernobyl or Fukushima, no matter how good the tomatoes look.
So basically, so if like you're feeding the bacteria good stuff and it releases like serotonin chemicals, what are some of the bad things they can release if they're fed the wrong thing?
Well, one, it actually changes the type of bacteria. So we know, and we've gotten as far in our knowledge base to know that there's a definite correlation between certain types of bacteria and certain diseases. And we see these patterns, these same patterns of bacteria. Some people might have heart disease. Some people might have chronic kidney disease. Some people might have depression. There seems to be some links in kids, like with autism. So there's a whole range of ways that we as human beings may manifest these sorts of imbalances that correlate. Now, one of the things that we haven't proven, because correlation, as we say, is not causation. So just because you don't know what came first, is it the disease and then the bacteria come, or is it the bacteria then the disease? It seems to be related to these types of bacteria, and these bacterial changes cause really, you've probably heard of this. People talk about leaky gut syndrome, and it's like kind of like an inflammation that affects the lining of the gut. And normally the gut, it's like Fort Knox. You only get in and out, and with these molecules, if you've got the high clearance and you go through certain what we would call channels or gateways. And instead, what happens is that instead of being Fort Knox, you become Walmart on like Black Friday, with the hordes going in and out and, just running through, willy nilly. And that causes this kind of ongoing low level inflammation. And what happens to your body, people talk about inflammation as if it's all a bad thing. And we need inflammation. We need our body. That's part of our body's mechanism. So think about it this way, and kind of reverse it because you live in Florida. So it'd be your air conditioning. But like in Montana in February, when it's minus 17 outside, I kick my thermostat on, and my house is going to stay at a nice comfortable temperature. But now imagine that the thermostat's stuck or it gets broken. And so every day it's just going up like a degree or half a degree. And that's what that chronic low level inflammation is. So it's not you go from comfortable to 110 in one day, but over time you can't turn that heat off, and it just slowly starts just cooking everything inside until it becomes an impossible place to live. And that's sort of what happens with chronic continuous inflammation. It just kind of builds and builds and builds over time. And these bad bacteria that are associated with the modern Western diet, this is the end result of what we see, what happens.
So I wrote some things down.
Okay.
Sorry. So
yeah, I wander a bit in case you hadn't noticed.
I wander all the time, and like,
hey, all who wander are not lost. It's not a bad thing.
Exactly. I'm just exploring.
Yes. Pirates.
Pirates, exactly. We're just a food pirate.
Yeah, there we go.
So, that's what I was going to say. So going back to the nutritionist thing, the thing that I got from going to the nutritionist as well was that it was almost like nutritionists were, in my, the best way for me to describe it, especially to a doctor, would be like a nutritionist to me was more like the research end, and they knew all about the molecules and like that you needed, you need more vitamin C, you need more this. But then when it came to like the practitioner side of like, how do I actually ingest that and put that into my body, you're kind of like left like up. It was just like left up to you, So like, you need to eat more complex carbohydrates. Like that's what she said to me. And then, to me as a, 14-year-old kid, I was like, oh, these sun chips are whole wheat. That's complex,
Exactly. Yeah.
So culinary medicine, that helps bridge that gap? Or, did you freeze? No. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, and actually, we kind of talk about. We actually have a lecture that kind of looks at exactly what you described and why that is. And one of the things we have to remember about nutrition is, as far as sort of medical sciences or even sciences in general go, it's a pretty young science. It's maybe 100, 125 years old. And in a way, nutrition has been kind of a victim of its own early success. So in the early days of nutrition, right, we said, hey, if you don't have enough vitamin C, you get scurvy. So give vitamin C, scurvy's gone. Give vitamin D, rickets is gone, so on and so forth. And it sort of became fixated on this one nutrient, one effect hypothesis. And so the problem is that when you're not dealing with a deficiency disease, of which nutrition has done a really good job around the world of addressing things like that, as we said, scurvy and rickets and pellagra and things like that,
scurvy
that you don't hear
is such a pirate disease, by the way.
Yes. It falls really short when you start talking about these complex chronic diseases, diabetes, obesity, heart disease, etc. And that hypothesis doesn't really work. And so the problem is when you keep trying to bang that square peg in a round hole and make it fit, you get an answer like you were saying, well, eat more complex carbohydrates. Well, what the hell does that mean and how does it work? And to add complexity to that, we have the newer sciences of nutrigenomics and epigenetics. And I was talking to some nutrigenomic doctors the other day. And, she's an internist, a family practice doctor. And she was saying, listen, all of a sudden I gained all this weight. I was weighing 230 pounds, I'm like 5'6". I had diabetes. And, I was exercising like a fiend. I was doing all these kind of diets and caloric restriction, and nothing was working for me. And it turns out that she has a genetic condition where, for example, she is like really sensitive to complex carbohydrates. And so as she said, like a vegan diet is one of the worst things I could be on, because those complex carbohydrates, I don't metabolize them as most people do, and they have negative effects for me. So she's like, I have to have some meat. I can enjoy some vegetables and things, but so on and so forth. And what we can really take away from that is that there isn't really a one diet fits everyone approach. And I think that's what sciences like nutrigenomics are telling us. And a real simple way for the audience to understand it is think about food allergies, right? My wife has an anaphylactic tree nut allergy. So I eat pecans and walnuts, and they're nutritious. I feel great. They're wonderful for me. I love a meal with them. She eats them, she dies. So yeah, so
selfish.
yeah, so no, that would only be if she had a shellfish allergy. Then it would be
No, I
shellfish.
said I have that with shellfish.
Oh yeah, so
So
yeah, so that really talks about that. And the one other thing I want to touch on was something we call epigenetics, which it turns out that it's the environment and how we interact with our environment changes whether certain genes are turned on or off. So you might have a gene for something, but unless you are exposed to it in the environment or interact with your environment in a certain way, it's never gonna manifest. So in the sort of metaphysical or the very classical ways of looking at health and food, we always talked about that we're interrelated, we're interconnected to our environment. And it turns out that what modern science is telling us is that the ancient philosophies were exactly right. We can't separate ourselves from our environment, because how you live and even what you think. One of the courses for our next level of culinary medicine is mindfulness and eating, and how what we think and how we think when we eat can literally change our health. And we measure that in very concrete ways, in terms of markers of inflammation, physiologic aging, and things called telomere lengths, and both functional and structural MRI assays.
Did you read that book?
Actually, yes, I read that book. There is a book specifically on that, on the effect on telomeres, and it was written by, she's a brilliant researcher out of California, and I'm going to blank on her name. It's Dr. Barbara something.
Oh, that's a different.
But she actually won a Nobel Prize for that research.
Yeah, I didn't read that book yet.
Okay,
I was reading the.
Get it on your list.
Yeah.
Great summer reading.
I mean, I love books like that because I find them really interesting because I'm kind of a nerd, but also they're just a little bit not that interesting, so I can fall asleep. You know what I mean?
It depends how many studies they're going to quote, but it is very interesting. I don't know about you. You mentioned you did martial arts. I did martial arts. As I mentioned, I've done them quite poorly for many years, hence all the joint issues. And Bruce Lee was wrong. Boards can fight back. They get you years later if you don't break them correctly. But it's very interesting to me, when we look at the approach of mind and sort of the Zen of food and eating. The very first lesson that the Buddha gave when he awoke from enlightenment under the Bodhi tree was to a group of school children, and it was a mindful eating lesson about how to eat a tangerine.
I recently was watching something on Buddhism with that tree, and I was like, how much of that you think is like a DMT trip? Like, I think he's tripping. Like, not that, but like in the best way. Because like everyone talks about how when they go on a trip and then they're like together with the universe and stuff. And I'm like, I think that guy had some mushrooms or something. But I think that's what happened. But eating a tangerine.
Yeah, well, and that was his first. Because as the story goes, he kind of woke up and he's like the enlightened one. Yeah. And he's like, and like you said, he's like coming back from a trip, and he's kind of like, no one is going to believe this. Whoa. How, no, who's going to believe this stuff, right? This is crazy. And he comes across these school children. He's like, I'll test it out on these kids. And so he does the whole mindful eating exercise of a tangerine with these kids, and they totally get it. And then the next thing that the Buddha does is give his, very, very famous sermon after that. But he sort of checked it out when he came out of his trip. The first thing he did was like go to the mindful eating exercise. So there you go, man. Good enough for the Buddha, good enough for me. That's what I say.
Yeah. And I also think like, I don't know, like sometimes because along with all this new science, right, comes all this new pseudoscience, right?
True.
And I think there's like a few, like two other things I want to touch on with that. But so like mindful chewing, where you chewing forever, just swallow it already. You know what I mean? Like there's a difference between like now we're getting dramatic. You know what I mean? But like it was like 65 chews or like something outrageous. Where like when I think of mindful eating, the other like factor that we haven't really touched on is eating meals with your friends, your family, your like the community. Talk about anti-stress, like being able to share a meal with someone is so therapeutic at times, and to cook it and it be good wholesome food takes it to the next level. And I think that's something people don't even think about when they think, oh, like living well.
Well, that's a big part of what we teach in culinary medicine. So there's a whole section where we talk about things like that. We kind of title it under the group of non-ingredient influences and dietary choices and how those impact health. And that's exactly what you're talking about. And see, this is why I love talking to food people, because you guys get it, right? As a chef, you get that it's not just the food and the ingredients you put on the plate, it's how you present them, and it's the environment those people are eating, and it's who they're eating with, and it's what in culinary medicine we call the food experience. And really what we teach in culinary medicine, what I try to teach the best we can, is to help individuals repair or reforge or somehow reconnect in a very positive way their relationship with food through that food experience. Because we all, as human beings, have to have a relationship with food. And when we look at studies like the Harvard Happiness Study, the Blue Zone studies done by National Geographic, and they asked a very simple question: what are the things in your life that correlate and are important variables in you being healthy, you being well, you living a long time as a functional person, and you being happy and you having a high quality of life? And in every single instance, the most important thing wasn't your cholesterol level, wasn't how much money you made, wasn't the car that you drove or the school you went to. It was the quality of your relationships. And for me, and I will disclaim my bias right away, I'm a very food-centric person, as you can tell. But as human beings, we all have a relationship with food. And, Chef, if that relationship is fucked up, every relationship in your life is going to be fucked up. And, you build in a house of cards, so you got to square that relationship. And it's all those things that you talk about, being able to eat with people and have that be a healing experience. As chefs, when we create food, that's love that we're given. That's love on a plate, and that is powerful medicine. There is no question. And the people who receive that, I mean, they have to take that in, and they have to be in a mind frame that they interact and be able to receive that. And in turn, they give us gratitude and an attitude of gratitude. And we know that that's healing. So, yeah, I get really annoyed when people say, oh, yeah, I get what you're talking about, Chef Dr. Mike. It's, nutrition and food is medicine and food is fuel. I was like, no, you're not a bloody car. You're not a Subaru. You're a human being. And it's actually about this relationship. And it's something I think maybe it's because of people like you who get that. Maybe that's why they go into food. I don't know the reasons behind it, but people who are in food, chefs, and I'm not talking about somebody, assembling a bunch of fried stuff at a drive-through, but people who love food and love to craft food and create meals, they get that. They get that food experience, and it is powerful medicine, as potent, as any prescription I can write. So, yeah,
So,
I feel very strongly about that. In case you couldn't tell.
I mean, you're preaching to the choir, basically. um, the so then I feel like podcasts like the big one like Joe Rogan and stuff like that.
Yeah.
They're very very focused on gut health, especially right now, and popping up around that kind of stuff, and also the anti-aging. I read that book that David Sinclair wrote about why we age and why we don't have to, like that was really interesting with the NHN or NHM and the NAD plus, and he was like
Oh, okay.
putting it.
NADH and NAD, yeah, and all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, that was very interesting. Like every time that guy goes on the podcast, he looks younger. Like it's a little scary. But around all that, like I see, especially in Florida, like I see so many like liquid IV places popping up, or like actually like getting it injected into your arm.
Yeah.
And so many like different like powders, I guess, like almost like you would take for like working out, like protein shakes, but they're like gut health powders and stuff like that, which aren't regulated because they're supplements.
Correct.
So, I mean, I always say, I think multivitamins, like taking your multivitamin, I think that's a good thing. But I think you need to make sure that you are getting it from a good source.
Well, yeah, and it goes back to what you said, right? As soon as that comes out, there's a lot of pseudoscience, and people, maybe they're well intentioned, but they're putting all these kind of things out there and making money off the latest fad. And I've just seen it come and go. It was and right, it was the bone broth stuff.
Wait, hold on. It infuriates me. Bone broth is like, oh my God. So I have a twin brother, right? And he's like, I don't like soup. No. He moves to California, or whatever.
Yeah.
He's like, oh, I think I got to start having this bone broth. And I was like, are you fucking kidding me?
Yeah.
Really,
you mean stock?
You mean stock? Chicken stock? You mean? And then not only that, like I was already outraged by having to pay, like if I didn't have any stock at hand, like having to go pay for it.
Yeah.
$4 a quart, and then they're gonna call it bone broth and like charge you $7.
Oh, $7. I saw a celebrity bone broth, and I priced this out, $15 a quart for a celebrity endorsed bone broth in the like healthy section of a supermarket.
Oh my God.
And you and I know what it costs to make that. And here's the kicker. Right? Excuse me, I'm getting so worked up. Like you, bone broth, this whole thing like irritates the hell out of me. But according to government labels, you can label something bone broth and it's just stock. It doesn't actually even have to have any bone in it. So they're not necessarily giving you the collagen that we use when we make a real stock, and using the bones and stuff like that. You could just throw in, the bits and bobs, and it could be what we would call a broth. And you can sell it as a bone broth because the government says, well, we don't care. They're all the same to us. So that label bone broth to the consumer literally guarantees them nothing. Except that you paid $15. And why don't you tell the audience what it costs you to make a quart of that?
I mean, if you guys are interested, I do have a video about how to make your own stock. But and this came out of more of a financial thing because pandemic happened. I have no money, you know. So I have a bag in my freezer, and every time I cook chicken, I save all the bones, even pork or beef. You know, sometimes I make a multi-animal stock or whatever, and all the carrot skins, all the onion skins, all the celery. You know, I'm chopping it up anyway. It's going in the freezer, and you know, these are scraps, so this is trash.
Yes.
So I made uh, like 2 weeks ago, I made 12 quarts of chicken stock for $0, you know,
And,
because the landlord pays for water. So $0.
and if folks were listening, they're charging and people are buying what you just made. Probably not even as good because they add a lot of stuff because they have to preserve it for the packaging and stuff. Not even as good as what you made for $15 a quart. And you want to talk about, being healthy on a budget, people are listening, go watch Chef's video, make your own stock.
And it's also like if you look at like a homemade chicken stock, like my chicken stock, if you never seen like if you've never seen like a just homemade stock before, you would think it was like beef broth because the chicken stock you get in the grocery store must be so diluted. It's kind of like that pea color, like, you know. It has a bunch of weird shit in it. It has like yeast in it. It has like some like I'm like, why is this in here? But you know, like I just made a matzo ball soup, and it was so dark you couldn't really see the matzo ball, but it's so good, you know.
That's so good for you. I mean, it was funny. I was working and giving a talk at the ACF in a couple of weeks, American Culinary Federation, and I'm talking about culinary medicine. And I was thinking about what you were just talking about because really my very first experience with culinary medicine, although I really didn't realize it at the time, was my mom's homemade chicken soup. And what you talk about, that was it, man. It's that broth and that taste. And, when I was sick, or somehow I think it just must be being a mom, when your kid is down and out, even though they're kind of trying to put a smile on their face. Like I said, we moved around a lot when I was young. So, I was 6 years old and being picked on as the new kid and, go cry in my room and then come downstairs and like everything's okay. But there was this one particularly bad day that I had when even the teacher just she just called me new kid and like wouldn't even use my name. And so, I came home and I would get home like around the bus would drop us off and get home somewhere between like 3 and 4. And my mom was using the kitchen about then fixing up dinner. And on this like worst of all days, there's my mom in the kitchen with a bowl of that soup. And she made the world right again,
Because that's the other thing. Like chicken soup is so subjective when you make it. What kind of was it, like a Jewish style where you boil
Yeah.
the whole chicken?
Yeah. So she made it as you might make you make a stock, right? So it was parsnips, celery, carrots, an onion, some herbs, a whole boiled chicken in there. And then when the chicken was done, you pick out the boiled chicken bits. They went back into the soup with the carrots and some of the vegetables. And I make a pretty good chicken soup. And like my great failure in life is it's like the holy grail. All my life I've been wanting one more bowl of my mom's soup. That would be like my deathbed meal, my death meal. It's like, okay, you're out of here tomorrow morning. You can have one thing. What would it be? It'd be like, I want one more bowl of my mom's chicken soup. That was it, and what you're describing, I mean, that this flashed back to me. I mean, that is healing stuff,
And it's good for you too.
It's very good for you. I mean, and you know what? You can list all the nutrients and antioxidants and all the fancy schmancy stuff. But at the end of the day, it was my mom, like you were saying, and whatever she put into it for an 8-year-old kid that made the world an okay place again. And that to me, that's culinary. That was culinary medicine. That is culinary medicine.
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I was just making I make really good quesadillas. And they're not healthy for you at all. But my friend who I haven't seen in like, I don't know, like a year or two, she just came to visit and she was like, "Can you make me quesadillas?"
Yeah.
Like, you know, it was great. But
And
I just
those
have her
those
appreciate that, like, you know.
you do, and those are important things as well, because those interactions, those emotions that we have, and when we share food like that, and we're going to have that special occasion, and you're going to do it with a friend that you haven't seen for a couple years, those are healing too. And I talked a couple of years ago. I used to do a podcast that I had a physician on, and she wrote a really interesting book. She was from California, and she wrote about how a lot of her patients who had a great time and a great attitude, but ate all the stuff she told them they shouldn't eat, were incredibly metabolically healthy. And all the people, who were doing kale smoothies, but so stressed out, about every little thing and counting this calorie, how, they were very metabolically unhealthy. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about, kind of all things in moderation as the disclaimer. But those are healing interactions too. Those are very important for us. We know mental health affects physical health. As a cardiologist, I can tell you one of the biggest risk factors for coronary disease, as powerful as any cholesterol level, is depression. And it's going to affect the immune system. As a cardiologist, I've never heard any of my colleagues tell somebody, "Hey, go do something that makes you happy because it's going to protect you from coronary disease." Instead, we write a prescription for a statin medication and a pharmaceutical. And because if we did that, we would get dinged by the insurance company for not prescribing the statin. But be that as it may, those are important. And I think what's important for the audience to take away, and your listeners, is when you do things like that, let's do it without the self-guilt and self-recrimination, because you're not helping yourself. And I hear this all the time because I'm always talking about a healthy pizza as my metaphor. And people are like, "Oh, I'm going to have pizza tonight. I guess I got to go to the gym tomorrow, or I'm going to have to, do this." It's like, hey, eat a good pizza and leave leave off the side topping of guilt.
Yeah.
You're not doing yourself any good. So we need to kind of give ourselves the one of the hardest things we can do as human beings is a little self-forgiveness for who we are and where we are. And as a martial artist, I learned a long time ago, it's not about getting knocked down, because as a human being, particularly as a martial artist, you will get knocked down. It's about getting back up. And that old Japanese saying, I'd studied Japanese style, and it was like, knock down 7 times, get up 8.
Yeah, exactly. And Black Belt's just the guy who made all the mistakes already.
Well, that's exactly right. And in much the same way, I approach culinary medicine, and I think you would appreciate this in much the same way I used to teach martial arts when I ran a martial arts school.
What martial art was this?
It's Bujinkan Budo Taijutsu, so it's a Japanese style of several other smaller classic schools like Takaki Yoshin-ryu, Gyoko-ryu, Gikan-ryu, things like that. And I still practice it. But when I would teach it, if somebody came in as a 5'2", 115-pound female, and my other student is a 6'5", 275 offensive tackle, I can't teach them the same techniques. Now, there are universal, as you know, universal principles that apply, right? The human body only bends and breaks in so many ways. And in a similar way, all our physiology is somewhat similar, but we're all different. And ultimately, as a physician and as a chef, you and I can't really prescribe culinary medicine regimen for somebody, because it's about what they like and they enjoy and their particular tastes.
Well,
in much the way that you move in a martial art, you have to develop your own style.
That's true. But I do have a question with that.
Okay.
The neurogenetics and the genomics.
Nutrigenomics, right? And
Nutrigenomics.
epigenetics.
Are they gonna get to a place where like they could look at my genes and say, "Hey, you should, maybe you should have a diet where there's a lot of potatoes, or maybe you shouldn't eat this. Like this is gonna
Yeah,
be hard for you."
they actually are. A couple of caveats. One, most insurance companies will now still will not pay for that, even though it's a great tool, as you point out, in terms of preventive medicine. So depending on what test you get and things, it can be expensive. Although more and more people are getting it, so the price is coming down. And I think some of these companies like 23andMe, where you can get the genetic swab, are doing things like that now. Anyway, you can pay like an extra fee, and they'll look at what are called SNPs, which are single nucleotide polymorphisms, and they're basically the very slight mutations that make me, you, and can help describe how we interact with our diet. So I was talking about that one physician who did it for herself and said, well, no wonder, I have a metabolism that is exquisitely sensitive to these kinds of carbohydrates. So when I'm trying to be a vegan and eat lots of these things, it's going against my nature, as it were. So she's like, I still pick high quality animal proteins, but yeah, they're an important part of my diet. And she's like, I'm 130 pounds now. I don't have diabetes anymore. And she's like, I fixed myself, and now she's out, trying to help everybody else. So we are getting to that place. I won't say that we're there yet, but it's very promising. But I think, sometimes people know, like it's interesting. I talked to my wife. I was like, didn't you ever, wonder what a walnut tastes like? Because you could never have one. She's like, no. She said, what's really weird is even as a kid, when I would see them, I didn't want them. And it's like, she's like, I never had any urge to eat. I thought they were gross. And like, I wanted to stay away from them. And I think that's kind of very interesting thing. We see that babies, before we start feeding them all the sugar, if they need carrots, the babies will eat carrots for 3 days. Then all of a sudden, babies are like spitting out the carrots, and they want to eat broccoli. And they intuitively know what their body needs, and that's why they're eating some of this and some of that, and they'll eat this for 3 days. Then we give them the pre-made, baby formulas and sugars and TV dinners, and it's all downhill after that. Then you wind up like me.
So that's interesting with your wife not wanting the walnut, because
Yeah.
When I became allergic to shellfish when I was around 12, and before that, my favorite food in the world was going to the Chinese buffet and eating all the crab legs I could possibly eat until like they threw me out or ran out. They would run out, and then they just wouldn't put any more out because I was still there.
They're like, wait till she leaves. Wait till she leaves.
And then all of a sudden, I became like anaphylactic to shrimp, and then it just gradually got worse and worse.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, did some sort of gene get turned on that could get turned off?
It can happen. There can also be things that are added to the seafood to preserve them in terms of sulfites, and sometimes the other preservatives. I've heard stories where people, for example, like you, they loved crab and would have Virginia blue crab. They, would eat tons of crab meat. And then one day they went in and ate some crab, and they blew up like a balloon. And then they would go back and try, crab later, and they were fine with it. And actually that happened with my wife sometimes. She one time, she loves crab. She ate crab and got a severe allergic reaction, and I was doing something, and she's like, I want to try crab again. I love crab. And I said, well, just try this little piece of blue crab. She ate a piece. It said, well, wait 20 minutes. I got your EpiPen right here. She was fine, and she ate a little more, and now I make crab cakes for her all the time. But I am very particular to make sure that they're fresh, and there's not stuff in there. I hear the same thing sometimes with people who say they're allergic to red wine, or they're allergic to wine. And a lot of times it's the additional sulfites that are put into wine to preserve it that interact with people and their gut, and not necessarily the food itself.
Well, a lot of people like I'll see that, and that's the thing too. Like when I think allergy, like if I put like if I rubbed one of the things I do, and if I'm at a restaurant, and like particularly it's usually like it's an Asian restaurant because like I love to go eat like beef pho, but sometimes they'll put fermented shrimp paste in the stock.
Oh yeah.
So like I'll take the stock and I'll rub it on my arm, and I know if I don't break out in hives, then I can eat it. So,
That's
but
true.
like so I would. That's really interesting that it was the sulfates in it. But when they people drink wine, like I know a lot of people that they're not necessarily. It's not like they can't breathe or something. They're just getting red.
Yeah, some people flush, and that can actually be a genetic trait. There are variations of what's called the alcohol dehydrogenase gene, which is how we metabolize alcohol when we drink it. And some people have a variant of that gene, and so when they drink it, what happens is they flush in their face, and that's just a genetic thing. Again, there are, I think, at least 5 different ways that we metabolize caffeine as human beings, and so one of the thoughts is that sometimes that these health benefits that we might see associated with things like coffee, in terms of the caffeine or how caffeine affects people, can be due to these genetic differences, that are just part of the makeup of who we are as human beings.
I love caffeine's my favorite drug. I think. I had keeping coffee yesterday. I was getting stuff done.
Yeah, I hear you. I still take calls, so I get that call at 2 a.m. and I got to go run into the hospital. And I'm like here in a hotel room. This is the fake backdrop of my backyard at home in Montana. But the first thing it does is a little pod goes in the Keurig, and I'm sipping that, on my way into the ER. So
Yep.
I hear you.
And when I was flying, it was like espresso to stay up to do the red eye flight, and then land and then take some melatonin and go to sleep.
That's just the Elvis prescription, right?
But the other thing I wanted to talk about was a huge problem in America is food lobbyists, right? So
That might be a whole nother show.
yeah, that
Gee.
might be a whole other show. But because like for instance, recently, like people were like, hey, it's okay to eat eggs. You know what I mean? And I love eggs and I always eat eggs. I love eggs. But for the longest time, it was like you're gonna have a heart attack if you eat more than 2 eggs a week or something like that. So how can you tell? Like how can I tell that this isn't the egg industry, like telling me like, hey, you
Well,
should eat more eggs than that.
okay.
Where
You can take our course, and I talk about eggs, and I show you all the research and the data. And so that's kind of what I've done. My purpose on this earth is to kind of be that filter. So I spend my days, going through all that information, so I can come on and tell your readers, listen, eggs were never a problem. The problem was an extrapolation of a flawed hypothesis where we said, oh, we think cholesterol is the sole root cause of heart disease, which we know now it's inflammation. And eggs are essentially cholesterol in a shell. And so if cholesterol is bad and gives you a heart attack, and eggs have lots of cholesterol, eating them must be bad. And so that's where that came from. There was never any real science behind it. And when we look at time after time after time, study after study after study, we actually find now the most recent study that I looked at showed that people eating like anywhere from 3 to more than like 7 eggs a day had the best blood lipid profiles versus people who never ate eggs. So, go figure that one out. Eggs, but when we think about it, right, eggs are one of nature's most perfect foods. Guy Fieri, sorry, I disagree with you. I love the eggs. I know he hates eggs, but sorry, Guy, but I love eggs, and I think they're one of nature's perfect foods. And so it is very difficult. But to go back to the food lobbyist question, right? We talked about the NOVA classification. I would wager money, and I don't have a lot of it because I'm not supported by food lobbyists, obviously, with my message. But I'd say 90% of your audience didn't know about Nova classification. Why is that? Well, go right to food lobbyists, right? Because they don't want you to know that it's the ultra processed garbage that you're eating. Keep you confused, keep you guessing as to what this is or what that is, and looking at the bag of chips and going, well, they say they got whole grains in them, so it must be good for me. Confusion is good for industry, and it is very, very difficult to sort out. To give and put in perspective how powerful an entity it is, if we look at a single company, so we're not even talking about Big Snack, but let's look at McDonald's because I know the numbers on it. I think there's over 150 countries in the world. If McDonald's was a country based on their revenues, they would be the 90th largest country by gross domestic product in the world. That is McDonald's alone. McDonald's itself feeds 1% of the world's population every single day. Now, that's McDonald's. Imagine McDonald's plus every other burger chain, plus the five big pizza chains, plus KFC and Pepsi Cola and Coca-Cola. And you can see that the money behind this is astronomical and buys a lot of clout influences. And unfortunately, it's not just food lobbyists, Chef, because at the other end of that is agribusiness. So one of the big problems in terms of growing in the food and the types of foods that are grown is in a lot of these third world countries and even second world countries, the governments don't have the money to help farmers. So farmers have to go to a Monsanto type corporation, and that's where they get financing, and that's where they buy their seeds and things on credit. And you see that this is really a self-perpetuating philosophy.
Well, also in the, not just the third world countries, right? Because our whole farming system is monopolized and it's not good. What they're producing is not good. Even when it comes to eggs, like you can get a dozen eggs for like $1.80 around here. And if you crack that open next to, like, I always buy Vital eggs. I really like that brand. They treat the chickens good and they're not,
That's important.
they're not, fed corn and stuff like that. Or, but you crack them next to each other. The $1.80 whatever egg is so pale in comparison. It's barely like a yellow yolk. And you crack the Vital egg or the organic egg, and it's like orange, right? And if you go to Europe, the eggs aren't even in the refrigerator because they don't wash off the coating.
Right.
Right. And then you crack those, all of those, that you can get the dozen for $1.80, not pay $5 or more. And you're going to get the good organic chicken egg.
and here's where the food people are getting crafty. So they know that's how you shop and folks shop. So what they're doing on those, 99 cent a dozen eggs, they're putting food grade dye into the feed. So when you crack the egg, the yolk is now, bright orange.
Oh.
Yeah, it's the same thing that they did with farm-fed salmon, right? So you would put dye into the food because the flesh of a wild salmon is that color because of the krill and stuff that they eat. They feed them basically vegetable pellets, some of them, not all the farm, but there are farmed salmon that are fed that, and the flesh is really pale and unattractive. So to do that, to make up for that, they just put dye in there to dye the flesh. So yeah, it's this constant cat and mouse game, and it's hard work. And that's why people, when you go to a restaurant, count on having a chef like you who cares and has sorted that stuff out. And
most people,
that's hard work.
Are you seeing in terms of like patience, are you seeing more? Because I feel like when I was a kid, probably everyone used to eat a lot of fast food, but now it seems like, most of the people that are eating it are going to be poor because that's what they can afford.
That's true. And what I would say, that I found fascinating, one of the things that kind of spurred me on to look at this more closely was, I would see in rural areas, farmers would come in and they'd be like 85 years old. They're working their like 200 acres, with them and like one or two other people. And you talk about that, what they would eat. And it was like, yeah, I get my vegetables fresh out of my garden and I cook them in my bacon grease. But it would turn out that the bacon grease was from the pig that they raised on their farm that was eating, all these sorts of really good things. So, it was a kind of, heritage breed pork fat you and I would pay top dollar for, to use as some call and, and making some treats in the kitchen. And it was different in composition. And these guys would come in and yeah, maybe they at 85 they'd have one blockage in their heart artery. I put a stent in. Maybe they wouldn't have anything at all. But these 35-year-olds were coming in and they would need triple bypass surgery. And their heart function was already damaged, by 50%. And I'm like, what the hell is going on? And I will never forget one. I think he was either 33 or 37, somewhere in between there. He literally came to my table in the cardiac cath lab with a huge heart attack from the fast food drive-in. He had just like was chomping on the burger, started getting this pain, which he thought initially was indigestion. So he drove himself to the emergency room. He's like, yeah, I was just in line, just ate this, gave me the most horrible indigestion in my life. They did an electrocardiogram. The guy was having a huge heart attack, and we wheeled him right in. And this is a guy in his 30s. I had to do an emergency procedure on a gal who was 28 years old on a Friday night. And, the next day, and this is where, it's not just the food industry, where the medical industry has failed as well. So, I apologize for my profession, on this behalf, but, we went in and I was talking to her and she was obese and pre-diabetic and we were talking about food and, she was obviously interested in, she was real honest with me. And this was in a real foodie town. So it kind of took me by surprise, kind of West Coast avant-garde, pride ourselves on having, great cutting edge cuisine and lots of organic things and farm to table. And she's like, what you were talking about. She's like, I just got so confused because it was like, eat this, don't eat this. Somebody tell me to eat that. Somebody tell me not to eat that. She said, I just did what was easy and cheap. And that meant going through the drive-through, and getting a sack of this and going through that drive-through over there or going to the convenience store. And as I'm talking about her now, mind you, I've spent about almost an hour now talking about, as you can tell, I'm passionate about it and feeling like I'm really helping this young lady. And the hospital tray of her food comes in and I look at it. And once again, I'm ready to hoist the black flag and fire the guns because what the hell is on her plate? It is a deli meat sandwich with American cheese, mayonnaise, and packaged condiments on the white bread that you were talking about. A salad in which I'm sure not one vegetable actually saw sunlight. And you could have used the little cherry tomatoes like bloody ping pong balls. And I swear that this is not a word of a lie. Yes, there was that horrible green jello on her plate as well. And the salad dressing was this stuff with all these inflammatory omega-6 olive oils and processed vegetable oils, no olive oil, and all these additives in it, and a bag of baked chips. And that was her heart healthy lunch on a Saturday morning after undergoing a coronary procedure and getting a stent placed Friday night, and the solution is, we're sending her out on, 4 or 5 different medications, not one word about, some good things to eat. And when this poor girl has to think back and say, well, what should I eat? What did the medical community tell me? What did they signal was a good thing to eat? It was a deli sandwich on white bread with American cheese. I mean, for the love of God, man, You asked at the beginning why I hoist the black flag and feel like an outcast on the seas. That's why.
Oh my God. Thank God you made this course though. So
Well, thank you God you have this podcast and we get to talk to folks.
yeah, it's, hopefully it'll reach more people soon.
Well, yeah, and that's what it's about because I'm not, Kraft Macaroni and Cheese ain't putting me on Food Network to talk about this, right?
Right.
So it's I owe people like you a debt of gratitude and thanks for helping get this message out because ultimately culinary medicine is not for medical professionals, it's for everybody. It's for each individual to take and work and practice in their life how it works best for them. I mean, you got to eat food that makes you happy, like pizza.
And you have to eat. I mean, also, yeah, speaking of, that farmer with the garden, like I have a giant garden on my patio. It's just a bunch of like storage containers that I made planters. I just had to make sure it was like, safer plastic. But
Yeah, but that's brilliant. I mean, that's the kind of creativity. Those are the kind of things that make a difference, you know. And when people can do what you do, and they use some plastic containers, and they start, getting some fresh basil, some fresh parsley, some fresh thyme, and they start tasting real food that's crafted instead of stuff that's been engineered to trigger your dopaminergic center, your pleasure and reward center in your brain through manipulating levels of sugar, salt, and fat. People start to taste again, and they start to say, wow, I'm tasting food, I enjoy it, man, this is great. And what I find in my world, it's like when I finally get a patient to quit smoking, and they come back like 3 or 4 months later, and they're like, "Doc, how did I smoke 2 packs a day? I can't even walk into a room where somebody's been smoking because that cigarette smoke is disgusting, and it makes me want to gag. How was I smoking 2 packs a day?" It's like you were addicted to it. You were conditioned. There were social cues, etc. And it's the same thing, when people start to eat real food, like the things you're crafting and the food that you're serving, when they can get enough of it, all of a sudden, I hear the same thing. It's like, how did I ever go through the drive-through? If I eat that food now, I know I'm going to get sick. I know I'm not going to feel well. But they never realized how good they could feel when they were feeling crappy 24/7.
yeah, that's true. In the actual course, is it are you teaching recipes? Are you teaching knife skills? Are you teaching?
Boy, you're getting to our next levels. so
Well, I'm
so
just wondering because I find when people are starting get into cooking, right? One of the reasons why I started making the YouTube videos is because I realized people were trying to learn recipes instead of techniques, right? They wanted to just know, put this here, put this there, but they're not saying, like, for instance, like I watched a video made, I think it was on like macaroons. It was something with meringue. And they're like, oh, make sure the bowl's really clean. Make sure, whip the egg whites until it looks like this, until it holds a stiff peak. But they're not saying like, you have to make sure the bowl is really clean because if there's a presence of fat, then the meringue won't hold because they're not going into that part. So how are you teaching? I feel like if you just taught a bunch of recipes, sure they would know those recipes, but then they wouldn't know what to do when they didn't have.
Right. So we actually don't teach any recipe. The course we have now that's available to the public is 100% online, and it's our introduction course. So that's our basic. And if you want to think about it, it's a tapas menu of what culinary medicine's all about. So we talk a little bit about culinary medicine. We talk about nutrition, like we did. We introduce you to these concepts of nutrigenomics. We talk about convenience culture and why people eat what they eat and the gut microbiome. And then we talk about what I call the art of sorcery, which is all the things you do as a chef that the public doesn't know and medical people don't know. In like, gosh, what's the difference? Is there a difference between wild salmon and farm salmon? And if so, do I need to pay attention to it, etc.? We don't teach recipes. I have a lot of recipes on the site. People can look at recipes. I have a cross appointment in our culinary school, which actually we have a center for culinary medicine at the culinary school at the University of Montana as well. And because you must have that ESPN and you're very prescient, meeting at the end of the month with my culinary dean as well as my dean from the College of Health. And we're putting together our next level of curriculum, which will have some classes and we'll have some basic knife skills in there because there are some culinary medicine courses and programs that are created specifically for health professionals. And I've met a number of graduates of those programs, and certainly they learned some good basic information. But I cringe because I see, some family practice doctor out there holding a knife, and I'm like, you're going to cut your freaking hand off. You have no basic culinary school skills, and if you're teaching culinary medicine, you need to have a culinary portion of that in there. So in our next level of curriculum, level 2, and then ultimately level 3, we will be teaching some basic culinary skills. You're not going to run a Michelin star restaurant when you finish our program. You're not going to have a culinary degree, but you will have some basic culinary skills of knowing, this is a julienne cut. This is a baton. Here's how I hold a knife. Here's how I dice an onion. This is what it means to braise. This is what it means to saute. We don't have those yet. What I encourage people to do, I do, and like this Thursday, we do practical culinary medicine webinars. So I'm actually talking about big pot blanching because it's so useful for summer vegetables. That's a free thing. So people can look at those videos. We have some.
Will you be, sorry to interrupt you.
Sure.
Will you be teaching sanitation?
We will be teaching that in our next level course. Just basic, kitchen,
like temperature danger zone.
You're just basic food safety thing. But we're not going to go through all the credentialing, to get your certificate. And if people want to do that, they need to go to culinary school or go to that course. But we will talk about that because basic food safety is something.
I think one of the best things that I taught like my family that they didn't think about was how to organize the refrigerator the safest way. But then I looked at Martin, I'm like, why do we have to crisper on the bottom? Like the raw meat should be down there.
You hit my wife's pet peeve because of my days in the kitchen. So like you can tell when I'm hungry because everything, is in a container. It's got a label and a date on it. And I use that blue painter's tape, and I've got my Sharpie, and like before I get to the kitchen, and she's just like, you are just like so OCD, and I was like, no, how many times have you opened the fridge and you're like, what is this? Can I eat it? And I'm like, here it is. You know what it is and when it was made, and so yeah, so all those sorts of things. I think sometimes our practices can get on the nerves of the people in the general public or spouses, but she's a good sport about it. At the end of the day, she realizes that it helps me from serving her spoiled food. So, it's worthwhile putting up with a little annoyance.
Oh yeah. And even the, if it holds water, stored upside down thing, like there's so many simple things that could, make people have stomach aches less. Especially too when you back to the factory farming, there's a lot of recalls of vegetables and meats and stuff. So if you accidentally get something contaminated and it's in your refrigerator, if it's stored properly, it's not going to affect anything else, which is important.
That's true. And people need to realize just because you buy something organic doesn't mean that you don't have to pay attention and clean it and store it and all those sorts of things. In some ways, the organic vegetables can sometimes be more susceptible to some of those kind of recalls and things that you're talking about. So yeah, so that's a big thing, and eventually we'll get there. Like I said, we've only gotten our introduction to culinary medicine program. Literally, I think like this week or next week, we kind of celebrate our 1-year anniversary of getting it out there. And I love the Go Grizz. I love the University of Montana But being a university and a state-run institution, the processes and getting things done, it takes it's like making
Well, what
risotto,
who
right?
was it
It takes a little time.
accredited by? Who's it accredited by? That was my
So our
I'm
program obviously has gone through the university system of internal vetting and accreditation because it awards 400 graduate level credits. So for students who take that, we have to go through this whole process of making sure that what we're teaching is actual science and what we say. Then we've done an independent accreditation. So the course itself will award 36 what's called level one, which are the highest level continuing medical education units. And so for physicians like myself, we have to get so many continuing medical education.
think my mom's gonna take your course. She was like,
Right.
"Can I take this for continuing ed?"
Yeah, right. And so she would get 36 level one credits by the American Association of Family Practice. So they've accredited us for 36. And then the American Culinary Federation has accredited us for 30 CEUs or continuing education units. So somebody could take that course and then use that to apply for their, CEC or whatever other advanced culinary degree that they wanted to obtain.
What was the name of the family one?
The American Association of Family Practice. So there are a bunch of different organizations that will give that are authorized to award level one CMEs because so those are good for physicians, nurses, physicians assistants, nurse practitioners, dietitians, nutritionists, etc. I always do tell people, however, whatever your area of specialty is, always check with whoever oversees your license and adjudicates those continuing education units. Make sure that they'll accept the course before you do it because you don't want to do it and all of a sudden they said, well, this doesn't really apply to being a radiologist, so we're not going to accept that, for example. So always check with your professional organization, your certifying organization, to make sure that they'll accept it. But we do award those both from the medical field and from the culinary field, and obviously from the university as well.
That's cool because I was looking into something with the ACF. Like for some like now, if you want to teach, because I had taught pastry before, and like now all of a sudden you need the ACF thing for like any state school, which is kind of. But I mean, I get it, but I'm also like, you just want my money at the same time.
But you could take the course and get you should be able to get 30 hours towards that.
Right. And even the Navy, you have to be ACF certified.
Now that's interesting. I did not know that.
That's because the Navy has the best food, apparently, out of all the branches of the military. I mean, I don't know best, but in I think in army stuff like that, they kind of have more of like an industrialized food system. I'm guessing because there's more of them, or if you're on like one ship, it's kind of like a set amount of people. But the admirals and stuff, they have like fine dining meals on the ship.
I didn't know that for the U.S. Navy, but I've got to admit, I love MasterChef Australia, and when I can, I watch all the older because these guys are great, and I actually learned things. And these contestants, so talented, showing up with these things that they're making, and they had a competition on a Australian naval ship, and they're like, this ship has a reputation for the best food in the Navy. And these guys were, like I said, you're saying they were dining on these beautiful, Michelin star looking lamb shanks, and I'm like, are you kidding me?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's like that was some good looking food.
But when you think about it, when you're when you're in those military situations, one of the only things you can look forward to is the food.
And what's really interesting is one of the books I wrote was called Ancient Eats, and so part of the research and things that we do is kind of looking at these ancient diets and how that correlates, and what were the foods like then? Can we use them? And that whole attitude actually goes back to the Vikings. So like you would go as an earl, I would throw this like magnificent feast, and I would have to be like very generous and have this incredible spread of food and ale and mead. And if you thought I was being stingy or my food sucked, you'd like, I'm not going out on that guy's rating ship. He's a loser. He can't even feed us. So these whole big mead halls where they would have these like these festivals and bond before they went to war and went to raiding and plundering and a pirating, as the Vikings would say, would be all about using food and drink and that social interaction to really come together as an elite fighting unit. And that's kind of the history of the Viking meal.
And we still do that today. That's crazy.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, really, we're programmed to do that. It's in our DNA as social primates, right? We're human beings because, your great ancestor, fired up, mastodon ribs over the campfire and brought it out for all the rest of us. And, then we sat there by the campfire, eating ribs and telling, stories under the African savanna. And that's what created human civilization. And there's a great book on that, if any of the readers are interested, called Catching Fire by Harvard anthropologist Richard Wrangham. And he makes a great case for the fact that fire and cooking, or chefs, are really what set us on the path to becoming the dominant human species that we are. And because when you think about it, we're the only, dolphins talk to each other, and birds, crows use tools to get food. So what makes us different than other animal species? We're the only species on the planet that cooks our food.
That's really interesting. And back to the microbiome too, like we also, the appendix, like we don't use it anymore. So I wonder.
Well, some people think that is actually kind of a storehouse of bacteria. So if you get sick and you get food poisoning and the bacteria changes and you get an infection, or some of the diseases we used to get that would have like a lot of diarrhea, like cholera and things like that the appendix would serve as like this extra storehouse to repopulate your gut with healthy bacteria as soon as you had fought off the infection. So some people think that that's a historic use of the appendix as kind of this little safety net, the safety reservoir of this bacteria, because the times that we thought the appendix was useless was the times that we thought the gut microbiome didn't do anything. And so now we know that the gut microbiome is so critical, and that the appendix is like this little secret storehouse. It's like the doomsday, box of good bacteria for our gut. That's a hypothesis anyway.
I wonder if it wouldn't really work, but because I know if you take antibiotics, it kind of wounds your gut health a little bit. But I wonder if the appendix jumps in there, but it probably would ruin the gut health of the appendix because it's all connected, right?
Well, that's why the appendix is sort of this separate thing that's kind of walled off. Yeah. And so they think that it doesn't participate in the same way that the large intestine and the small intestine necessarily do. So it serve as an area that does, protect those bacteria. And you're right, antibiotics do definitely affect, the gut microbiome. And so some progressive hospitals, for example, when they give you antibiotics to take, are also giving you probiotics to take to help repopulate your gut, even sooner with beneficial bacteria.
Yeah, my mom would always be like, here, eat some yogurt.
and you talk about mental health, right? So there was a study done that showed for women taking yogurt on a regular basis, they suffered less, depression type symptoms and things like that than folks who didn't. And again, going to the NOVA classification, right? We talk about dairy. That's not really a great way to look at food, right? We have fermented foods, and fermented dairy is a whole separate category than fresh dairy like butter, cream, cheese. yogurt, heifers, aged cheeses, completely different, category. And things like cheese have really been shown when we looked at them closely to have tremendous health benefits. And we always talk about the French paradox in terms of the benefit being wine, but let's not forget that in that study, the French were eating 40 pounds of cheese a year. So they ate the entire yearly allotment that the US government was recommending that an American consume for a year. The French were eating that in cheese alone and had 50% the cardiovascular event rate in the population studied than people in the United States.
And and way more fun.
And way more fun. And that's part of it too. I get this question a lot. Like people go like the Mediterranean diet, is it really the food they eat, or is it the fact that they drink wine and they have more fun when they eat? And I was like, as we talk, I think that is an important part of it, is that they have fun. In Europe, there's a much more still to this day social aspect to dining and dining in the evening. And, it's been a while, I think, since any of us traveled, but I can remember going to Italy, particularly Greece, and it's 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, and people are still, sipping wine, sitting outside, enjoying company, eating little light snacks.
Well, that's the other thing. Well, two things. Number one, the thing that like instead of having like a meal, like I would love to just have like charcuterie all day, every day. Like, just like a mix of everything.
Yeah.
So they're I was working as a flight attendant and I would go to Paris all the time. I would go to, Italy. I would go to Norway. I would go to Scandinavia a lot. Which, talk about pizza. These people, that's another story. Anyway, hold on.
And the late night sausage snacks they have up there that are totally weird. But go ahead.
Yeah, but so in Barcelona, the food in Barcelona is so good and it's so cheap for an American. And I would just sit there and eat olives and the fucking bread with the tomato crushed on it and the wine and chill, and you're eat and all you have nuts, like all different things, so you're getting all different kinds of food, and which is good. And also, but the other thing I was like, they eat way later than us. They might go out at, like, if they go out at 9, that's kind of early. So you go and you eat, and then and then you're still, you're dancing until wee hours of the morning. But, here it's like, oh, don't eat past 8 o'clock. Like, like all this nonsense. And I'm like, I think it's just more like, try not to eat a full meal and then lay down immediately,
Yeah. And it goes back to what you were talking about earlier, Chef, when you were talking about, that shared meal. You're sitting around there, you're eating the nuts, you're having the olives, you're tasting the cheese, you're talking, you're sipping the wine. Yeah, you might eat for hours. I mean, there was actually a study done looking at an unlimited Mediterranean diet. So eat as much as you want, any way you want, but eat that Mediterranean approach that we're talking about versus the American, recommended diet at the time, which was more like the low fat approach. And people ate more calories, ate more fat on the Mediterranean diet, were significantly more healthy, and lost weight with the Mediterranean approach than eating, what the doctor writes a prescription and the, no fat, no joy diet.
Yeah, but the other thing too was like people getting tricked is like, I remember the low fat thing, and I was like, but this has a ton of sugar in it,
Yes.
Like they're always going to put something in there to make you eat it,
Well, let me share with you some recommendations from the American Heart Association within, the last decade and a half, where their recommendations when they were pushing this low fat stuff was like, if you get really hungry between meals, just suck on a hard piece of candy to assuage your hunger between meals. So don't eat fat, have something that was pure sugar. Now, those were recommendations that you could have found, 15 years or so ago on the website under recommendations from the American Heart Association. So no wonder people are frustrated and fed up when health professionals come back yet another time and say, no, no, this time we got it right, folks. This is really what you should eat. This is really what you shouldn't. And you're like, we've heard this song and dance before. Get the hell out of here. Um,
Well, they
so
also don't even teach how to, like, I was lucky in my high school, we had a cooking program, but like, if you look across, the home ec class, when it comes to budget cuts, is always the first one to go.
yeah, and I have seen some chefs. A friend of mine runs a great restaurant. Which, if you're ever in Keene, New Hampshire, got to go to Luca's Mediterranean Cafe. Shout out to Luca. He does all the things the way we're talking about. But he and I helped him one year. Does all these fundraisers to help maintain a culinary course for kids in high school, like you're talking about. And not only that, he also does fundraising so that one of the top graduates of that high school program then can have money to actually go to culinary school, go to a 2-year culinary school program, and kind of materialize their dreams. So there are people out there like Chef Luca doing incredible things. Another buddy of mine, Chef Ted, runs a great restaurant over in St. Petersburg, The Mill. Chef Ted Dorsey, and he has a whole program where he works with at-risk youth and helps get them into the kitchens. And at the University of Montana, we have a program for some of the at-risk youth in our town of Missoula, and we pair them with college kids on an organic farm called Peas. And my buddy Josh runs that, and they're mentored with a college kid, and they work on the farm, basically kind of for a semester, and they learn how to grow things. They get a sense of accomplishment, and then that organic produce is used to help feed, like, veterans, low income families, and things like that. And part of it is sold to high end restaurants to help pay the cost of giving the rest of it away.
Oh, that's really cool.
So
But
there.
the other thing was too with the low income and the fresh food. There's a food drive that my neighborhood went to when the pandemic just hit, and like people were coming back with all this food, and in the restaurants, like you get like a huge crate. So she had gotten a huge crate of yellow summer squash, but she didn't know how to cook it.
Yeah.
So people were getting all this great fresh food. And I was like, give it to me. So I roasted half of it with like garlic and, onions and everything and the herbs from the garden. And then the other half I made like a soup out of, like a cream of squash soup. It was great. But like she made it, she was like, this is the squash, like for the soup. She was like, what? you know?
Well, that's part of the problem with the way, in certain instances, culinary medicine is being disseminated, where it's for healthcare physicians only, and they have this idea of, hey, I'm going to be in my office, I'm going to write you a prescription to go here and get fresh, a carton of fresh vegetables 2 or 3 times a week. But as you said, it does no good when somebody doesn't know how to use it. So, we've got to, hand in hand with the information, we have to give people practical guidance, on how to make it delicious for them. So if you love that Mediterranean style food, you can cook that. If you want those Latin flavors and you love that, you can turn that into something. Whatever it is that makes it just yum for you. People like you can help show them how to do that, with a great product, and that's what we need, and that's why. I look at this, my appointments are not just in the college health, not just in the culinary school, because it takes a community of us. It takes all of us to get out there, because we all bring different skills, if we're going to solve this problem. And the things that you were talking about, just now, you're hitting on food waste, right? 30% of the food in this country is thrown away. And this planet can't continue the way we're going. So we have to look into ways to sustainably farm, to use our food and not waste it, and be respectful. That's the thing that I get from people like you and chefs. I mean, you respect the food, and that just comes with a whole different approach to it. Then people are like, well, stop the hunting and killing of animals. Buy your meat in a supermarket where animals aren't hurt. Sort of mentality. So yeah, I think we if we all come together, and embrace these and do things together, we can affect a lot of positive change at a lot of different levels. That's my hope, anyway. My dream.
I couldn't agree more. I'm trying to, especially I'm gonna have someone on later that his name is Jeff Butcher, but he's actually a butcher.
Oh,
And
that's great.
so we're gonna talk a little bit about conservation of animals, and because I think
Good.
there's a huge misconception when it comes to hunting, and
There is.
it's like being from the Northeast too. The culture is very anti-gun, very
Mhm.
anti-gun. And moving to Florida, um, it definitely opened my eyes a lot because it's more rural. There's more people that love guns, basically. um,
So, Chef, I'm
yeah.
going to set. I want you to come to Montana. We're going to try to hold some conferences next year at Culinary Medicine. You and I have to stay in touch. And if you want to see the Old West gun culture, you got to come to Montana.
I love to. I really want to go hunting. I really want to, have that experience and be able to get some of my own food because like I had to do that once with a chicken. It was like a culinary school kind of thing. Um, but it makes you respect your food way more,
Yes.
and it also makes you like when I see those meats in the grocery store, it's almost like, how dare they like treat the animal that way at the same time.
Well, I'm very particular, and I'll pay more to get an animal that's raised a certain way, as opposed to sort of this industrial type stuff. You know, the breed is important in terms of the health, because of the way and the types of fats and compounds that develop in the animal. How the animal is raised matters. So I think we need to take all those things into account. I think chefs do, and I think a challenge, which I'm so glad to see you doing with Jeff Butcher the Butcher, is helping educate people on that, because they do need to be aware, of those things and those options, that are quite available, out there.
And also, it's becoming like I use a butcher box right now.
Mhm.
I have to, I don't know, I've heard some interesting things, so I think I have to follow up and make sure they're
Yeah,
still doing what they're supposed to be doing.
yeah,
But that gets all your heritage raised pork, free range chicken, grass fed beef, all that. That's what they sell. But it's a subscription service. So by putting in
yeah.
a grocery store, I'm basically paying what I would pay for meat in the grocery store, not organic, but I'm getting organic. Like it's cheaper than getting all this, at Whole Foods or whatever. And even with that, like I'm not really sure where that's coming from. So,
Yeah, it can be hard to trace, and those are great solutions. When you come to Montana, we're going to have some bison from my buddy Troy, down at Bitterroot Bison, certified. I mean, you talk about a guy that just loves his animals. He will not let anybody else, butcher the animal. Each animal that goes out, he goes out. He's actually been trained by the Native Americans, in the right that honors the bison, and he's actually a lot of the Native American culture is kind of at risk, and he's actually been called to go to different tribes to reteach them their ritual of honoring the bison, as and so on and so forth. And they use all parts of the bison, so they have they use the horns and the skulls and the skins and things like that. And the bison are all grass finished, completely on these couple hundred acres. And we actually did a shoot for a little video that we did that hopefully I'll be able to, put out soon, talking about red meat. But we went to Troy's ranch, and you can kind of see him there. And he's this incredible guy who's so dedicated to these bison, and looks like he just stepped off the stage from his Metallica tour. I mean, I saw him and I was like, no way, man, dude. It looks like James Hetfield just stepped off stage. I was like, "Are you sure you're not James?" He's like, "No, dude, I'm here with my bison."
I'm here with my bison. That's awesome. All right. Well, I have to start getting going, but
this has been a blast. Thank you so much, Chef.
Thank you.
This has been great. And if you will send me all the links and whatnot, I'll make sure I blast this out on my social media. And if folks want to visit us, see what we're about, just hit Chef Dr. Mike, chefdrmike.com, and the links to the university, the course, all the information, yada, yada, yada is all there. So hope to see you out there on social media, Instagram. And I'm on Clubhouse, so follow me on Clubhouse. We'll talk about healthy pizzas.
Oh, yeah? What's your Clubhouse name?
Chef Dr. Mike. Yeah, very original.
I didn't get into it. I don't know.
Yeah, well, every Friday every Friday 12 noon on Pizza Club, we're talking about different aspects of creating healthy pizzas. Again, my metaphor, simile type food, and this week we're going to kind of talk about sauces and stuff. So if you're there, give me a follow. And if you're interested in pizza, tune on in.
I'm gonna check it out. Maybe I'll get into pizza now. I mean, Clubhouse. I'm already into
pizza. Yeah. We got to get you an uni.
Oh, an uni?
Yeah, the pizza oven was just approved by the AVPN out of Napoli for making Neapolitano, officially sanctioned Neapolitano pizzas. It can hold I think about 2 10 to 12 inch pizzas.
Oh,
it's
the
wood fired. Yeah, well, it's wood or gas. The new one's wood or gas, but they get up to 900 degrees, so it's the right temperature to do the Napolitano pizzas. Exactly.
Yo, the best one I ever had though. Short story, real quick. Copenhagen. Best
Copenhagen
I ever had.
That's crazy. But they say some of the best pizza, Napolitano pizza now is in Japan, because they've all gone over there, trained, and gone back, and they're making some killer pies in
they do the same thing with I think it might even be the ACF. They have the Culinary Olympics every couple of years. Yeah. And for the longest time, we would win all the time in the bread category. And Japan won they broke through that threshold. They won, and now they haven't stopped winning.
Yeah. And it's going to be pretty hard to dethrone them once they're on top. But
yeah, they're so good. But the other story I was going to tell you before was there was I would go to Sweden all the time, and they actually have a really good pizzeria in the Arlandia airport, if anyone is in there. And it's on the first floor. I don't remember the name of it, but it's it's there. It looks very nice. But so there was Indian, or he might have been something else, but guy working, and I'm looking around and I see all the Swedes cutting their pizza up with a knife and fork. That's how they eat it. So I'm like, all right, that's weird, right? So I go and I grab my pizza, and he gives it to me, and it's not sliced. And immediately, I was very tired. I wasn't very polite. I was like, what is this? And he was like, what? I was like, why didn't you cut my pizza? What is this? And he was like, are you from New York? I was like, New Jersey, but whatever.
Same difference, right?
And then he was so relieved to meet someone who folded their pizza. He gave it to me for free.
Oh, wow. So I got to ask you real quick before we go, because we had this discussion on Pizza Club on Clubhouse the other day. This Swedish fad of putting banana on pizza. Did you ever see that?
No. No.
Okay.
I've never even seen anyone do that in Sweden.
Well, supposedly it's a Swedish craze now.
This sounds like the TikTok watermelon and mustard nonsense, to be honest with you.
I don't know. It was all new to me and very strange.
Bananas?
That's what they say. I only report the news. I don't make it.
They don't even really. I mean, the Scandinavian people love watermelon. Like, if they were gonna put, like every hotel I've stayed in Scandinavia, like Denmark, Norway, Sweden, watermelon. They love it. It's watermelon, Pepsi Max, and Capri Sun.
Okay.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Someone explain that to me in the comments.
Sounds like a Chopped episode.
Put that on a pizza.
There you go. All right, Chef. Well, stay in touch. Thank you so much.
Thank you. See you
Bye-bye.
later. Bye.